I came back to Port Townsend on a Sunday that smelled like rain and cedar. The driver rolled past the marina and then up toward Alder Street, where the hillside houses look like they're holding their breath. My place, white clapboard, deep blue trim, had always felt like a steady heartbeat in a town that swayed with the tides. I expected the entry lamp to be a small moon waiting for me. Instead, the front steps were crowded with cardboard and silence. The boxes weren't messy. That was the worst of it. Everything had been arranged with a care that felt ceremonial. A stack of neatly taped cartons, my old quilt folded with the heather-colored side out. A lamp I'd bought the year Lena was born lying on its side like it had fainted. The ceramic finial, a tiny bird, stared at me from the doormat as if it couldn't quite place my face. My key slid into the lock and stopped, catching on a deadbolt I didn't recognize. I tried the code on the smart keypad, the one Lena had insisted we install for convenience. The screen blinked a neutral refusal. The lock emitted a polite tone, the sort of sound elevators make when you press a button for a floor that doesn't exist. For a long moment, I listened for footsteps. I wanted to hear a familiar shape moving through what used to be mine. The whisper of a sweater sleeve against a hallway wall, the hum of the dishwasher that never closed properly. The house gave me nothing in return. A text arrived with the quiet confidence of a decision already made. Lena, Mom, please don't make this harder. We had to make a change. I'll explain later. I pressed my palm to the door. Alder Street tilted under me like the deck of a boat. I typed, then erased it. The porch rail was damp. I could smell the sea before I could see it. I told myself that maybe there had been a mix-up. Maybe the lock company messed up a firmware update, or there was a contractor inside, or Lena had panicked about a stain on the rug and moved things temporarily. But the boxes were labeled in her looping print the way she labels everything. Books, Mother, Linens, Mother, Misk, Mother. The labels were kind, which made them cruel. I lifted the top flap of a carton. The scent that rose up belonged to the past, lemon oil, a trace of my winter soap, old paper. On top, tucked in like a napkin at a fancy place setting, was a single sheet with my name at the top. Not a letter. A list. Change of address filed. Utilities transferred. Recurring deliveries paused. No signature. No apology. Administrative erasure in 3 lines. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo, a cheerful image that did not include me. Lena at the dining table with a woman I'd only seen twice, Madison, the financial planner with tidy eyebrows and a voice like public radio. A bottle of sparkling water stood between them like a witness. Beneath the photo, a caption, "We'll talk at a better time." Promise. The house watched me through its dark panes. That dining room had once been a place where I ironed Lena's rehearsal skirts while she stared at the ceiling and claimed she wasn't nervous about the school play. She was 8 then and believed the world could be bargained with if she asked sweetly enough. She's 33 now and still believes in bargains, only the currency has changed. A neighbor's wind chime clicked at the end of the block. 3 muted notes, rain on metal. I steadied the lamp, righted the bird. My reflection hovered in the front window, a woman with salt in her hair and a suitcase she thought would be set back down inside her own hallway. When the rain started, it arrived as mist first, the kind that settles in your lashes before you realize you're wet. I pulled the quilt over the boxes. My hands knew the stitching by heart. I'd made it the year the roof leaked, sewing between buckets and laughter, telling Lena that a home is a living creature and we have to feed it time. A message popped up from an unknown number. "Ms. Hart, this is a courtesy confirmation from Cascadia Title. Your status update is complete." I felt the world tilt again, this time sharper. Title, not utilities, not a rug cleaner. Title. I walked down the steps because standing still made me feel like I was anchoring the wrong boat. 2 blocks away, there's a set of shared allotment plots that lives on borrowed land. Raised beds and a rack of tools with names burned into the handles. I didn't go through the gate. Instead, I sat on the low rock wall and watched droplets form at the edge of the rosemary. I waited for the shock to break into tears. It didn't. Grief arrived like fog, It kept close and quiet and made the familiar look strange. I tried calling Lena. The call rang and dropped and sent me to a voicemail that sounded newly recorded. I left nothing. What would I say? Hi, honey. I'm outside our house, and everything that proves I exist here has been folded into boxes labeled as if I were a tenant who forgot to leave a forwarding address. I have never been good at leaving messages that require me to perform pain. By late afternoon, the light thinned into the color of pewter. I wheeled my suitcase back toward Alder Street, not because I planned to knock again, but because my passport was inside and I didn't trust a porch with passers-by who didn't know my life was now an exhibit. On the corner, I paused. Through the bay window, I could see the edge of the dining room, the table we found at a barn sale in Chimicum. The chair I always took because it faced the water. A figure crossed the room. Lena, hair up, moving quickly. She passed through the frame like a projection, two-dimensional for a second, my child and not my child. I didn't call out. I have learned the difference between presence and intrusion. Instead, I went to the only place in town where I could charge my phone and be anonymous, the municipal reading room. Inside, the air was dry and warm, the way learning often is. I found an outlet beneath the travel shelves. While the battery crept upward, I opened my email. There were 2 new messages, flagged red. The first was from my bank, verification of online authorization changes. The second, shorter and colder, was from a local firm I'd never hired, document notarization complete. At the bottom of the email sat a scanned stamp, ink blue, crisp, official. The name below it made my pulse settle into a very slow rhythm. Ruth Ellison, Notary Public, Ret. Retired. The word snagged. Why would a retired notary be stamping anything? And why did the name sound like something from the edges of memory? A woman who used to bring butter cookies wrapped in wax paper to neighborhood meetings. Did she still live in town? Was she the kind of person who would lend her seal to a stranger? Or had someone used her name the way my key no longer worked? Politely, efficiently, without me? I printed nothing. I took no photos. I sat and counted my breaths to keep from breaking them. In the far corner, a man in a raincoat argued softly with the printer, as if the machine would change its mind if he sounded reasonable. My own reasonable voice had nowhere to go. A librarian pushed a cart past me and smiled the way people do when they recognize your face but not your name. That was almost a comfort. I am more than one role, I told myself. I am not a porch full of labeled past tense. I am not a line item on a title search. When the building closed, I had to choose, return to the house and become a scene, or stitch myself to the night and keep moving until my fear took a different shape. I chose the latter. The rain had softened into threads. I walked the waterfront, letting the gulls' cry stitch sound into the air. At a diner near the ferry, I ordered tea I didn't drink and watched the glass fog from the inside. I texted one person, not Lena. Are you still in town? Evelyn Hart from Alder Street. I didn't add the memory that lived behind the name. Block parties where we traded recipes, the way her laugh started low and rolled upward. When the reply came, it was immediate and uncluttered. Ruth Ellison, yes. What do you need? The need was simple and impossible. I think my daughter rearranged my life on paper, I typed. I need to know what gives those papers weight. I hovered over send, then attached nothing. Trust should be measured twice, like wood. Ruth responded with an address near the old shipyard and a time that was not tomorrow. It was now. The walk took 15 minutes. If you didn't count the way your thoughts slow you down. Ruth's house was a tidy blue rectangle with a brass porch light that glowed like a coin in a magician's hand. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she kept conversation on a low simmer and stirred it when she saw me coming up the path. Evelyn, she said, and her voice folded my name into the room. She had the posture of someone who used to stamp documents for a living and now stamps out trouble because no one else will. Inside, a kettle clicked off. On the table lay a neat stack of folders, a battered seal, a bone-colored envelope tied with cotton string. You're not the first, she said quietly, and you won't be the last. Sit. I sat because defiance had worn itself thin. Ruth slid a legal pad my way. "Tell me everything in the smallest pieces you can bear," she said. "We will make a map. Then we will take their map away." The relief that hit me was not dramatic. It was structural, like a beam settling into place. I told her about the lock, the boxes, the list that wasn't a letter, the emails that didn't ask for consent so much as inform me it had been granted. I did not say Lena's name right away. A daughter, when placed in the mouth, can cut. Ruth listened with attention I had not earned but needed. When I finally said, "My child did this," she didn't flinch. "People confuse caretaking with control," she said. "It's not a new confusion. It only feels personal because it is." On the wall hung a framed photograph of a lighthouse during a storm. The light kept burning, which is what lights do when they are not asked whether they're tired. Ruth followed my gaze. "Point Wilson," she said. "The wind there changes its mind every 10 minutes." We outlined a plan, not a dramatic one. Tomorrow, because the night had narrowed, we would request a freeze on any digital authorizations tied to my name. She would verify what someone had filed at Cascadia Title and whether her own name had been borrowed. I would not go back to the porch with my heart in my hands. I would find a room at the Little Inn near Quincy Street, the one that smells faintly of pine cleaner and bread, and sleep sideways across the bed the way you do when a day refuses to end. At the door, Ruth hesitated. "Whatever they think they've done," she said, "a deed is more than paper. It remembers who watered the azaleas in February." Then she placed the battered seal on the table as if to show me its smallness. "And this is just a tool. Tools obey the hand that holds them." Outside, the rain had become a soft static. Alder Street was a dark line somewhere behind me. I felt the town at my back like a coat I hadn't realized was warm. In the distance, a foghorn sounded, one long note, then quiet, then another. It was not comfort exactly. It was location. At the inn, the clerk slid a key card across the counter with an expression that suggested nothing in my life was remarkable, which helped. The room had a window that faced a scrubby maple and a chair with arms worn smooth by other people's waiting. I set my suitcase on the rack and did not open it. I didn't want to see my life stacked and folded. I wanted morning. I lay down without turning off the lamp. Somewhere between the first and second hour of pretending to rest, I pictured my house not as a fortress I'd been pushed out of, but as a stage set that could be struck in a single afternoon. The walls were flats, the windows props. What mattered wasn't lumber and paint. What mattered was that my name had been replaced, and the replacement had been done by the person whose name I once wrote on school permission slips with a flourish. Dawn would come, and with it a new arithmetic. Documents against memory, law against intention, love against the versions of love that dress up like help. I closed my eyes and thought of the lighthouse at Point Wilson, the one that kept working even when the waves argued with the shore. If a light could be patient, so could I. In the morning, I would begin reclaiming what breath belongs to me. Tonight, I learned how to be very still without disappearing. I woke before the light did. The room smelled faintly of detergent and damp wood, the kind of scent that doesn't belong to anyone. For a moment, I couldn't remember which part of my life I was in, the one where my name still matched the mail, or the one where it had been quietly crossed out. Then I heard the ferry horn in the distance, a single low note that reminded me where I wasn't. The mirror above the dresser showed me a woman who had forgotten how to sleep properly. My hair looked salter than the night before, my eyes both older and sharper. Loss, I realized, doesn't always hollow you out. Sometimes it chisels. I dressed in yesterday's clothes and made my way to Ruth's house on foot. The streets were slick from rain, and the town was just beginning to stir. Delivery vans, the clatter of a newspaper box, the hum of someone's morning radio through an open window. Port Townsend, in its small coastal stubbornness, didn't care that my world had slipped its frame. That was oddly reassuring. Ruth was already up. Her front door was open to the smell of toast and lemon polish. She waved me inside without preamble and pushed a mug toward my hands. "No cream, right?" she said, as if we'd done this for years. Her kitchen was organized in the way people do when they need their surroundings to behave. Files stacked by color, pens arranged like soldiers, not a crumb in sight. On the table lay a thin folder and a laptop that looked older than either of us. "I checked the county registrar's portal," Ruth said, adjusting her glasses. "The title hasn't been transferred yet, but there's an attempt logged." She turned the screen toward me. "Someone tried to upload an authorization form under your name yesterday evening. Digital signature, electronic stamp, the whole show. It didn't go through. The system flagged the notary seal as invalid." I blinked. "Because of you?" "Because I retired 6 years ago." She smiled without humor. Whoever did this didn't know that detail, or didn't care. The file she handed me looked harmless. A scan of a form filled with neat black text and a blurry image of my signature. It wasn't even a good imitation. My name tilted wrong, like a stranger trying on my shoes. Ruth tapped the page. "This is identity misuse. They might call it digital confusion, but the law doesn't. If your daughter, or someone using her credentials, tries again, it'll hit a fraud flag." My stomach tightened. Hearing the word daughter from someone else's mouth made it sound official, like a charge being read aloud. "She wouldn't do this alone," I said quietly. "There's a woman, Madison. She works with her. They've been close." Ruth's eyebrow lifted just slightly. "Close is a flexible word." "She's persuasive," I said. "Professional. The kind who smiles while she's cutting rope." Ruth jotted something on a yellow pad. "Then we'll make sure there's nothing left for them to cut. Step 1. We lock your property record with a security hold. Step 2. We report the attempted forgery to the registrar and your bank. Step 3, she paused. You make peace with what happens when your daughter finds out you're fighting back." I wanted to ask if peace was optional. Instead, I nodded. We spent the morning drafting the notice. Ruth typed with the precision of someone who'd once lived inside legal language and learned how to bend it without breaking. Every word was deliberate. Owner of record, verification request, restricted authorization. It felt strange, watching my life translated into clauses and subclauses. The ink didn't tremble when I signed. That was something. After lunch, Ruth suggested a walk to the courthouse. The air had shifted, gray light breaking through, the kind that makes the sea look silver instead of blue. On the way, she talked about her late husband, a man who'd spent 40 years as a mail carrier and never once lost a parcel. He believed paper was sacred, she said it carried souls. I used to believe that too, I said. Now it just carries what's left of me. She didn't argue. At the clerk's office, we waited in a short line behind a couple arguing softly over boat registration. The clerk who took our forms had the polite indifference of bureaucracy, a blessing, really. She stamped the first page with a mechanical thunk that sounded like a door locking shut behind trouble. When she slid the receipt back to me, I felt an absurd pulse of triumph. Paper against paper. For the first time in days, I had proof of something that still belonged to me. Outside, Ruth tucked her hands into her coat pockets. "You'll get an email confirmation tonight," she said. "After that, they can't touch the record without your in-person approval. It's not invincible, but it's a wall." I looked toward the harbor. The tide was coming in, slow and deliberate, reclaiming the mudflats inch by inch. "I like walls that move in my favor," I said. We parted at the intersection. Ruth's figure shrank into the mist like a punctuation mark, necessary, final. I walked the long way back to the inn, stopping for soup I didn't taste. When I finally opened my phone that evening, there were 9 missed calls. All from Lena. No messages, just the rhythm of insistence. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my email and saw the county confirmation. Title hold successfully enacted. A minute later, another message slid in. No subject, no greeting, just one line. You didn't have to make this a war. L. I stared at the words until they blurred. The line between mother and adversary is thinner than anyone wants to admit. I closed the laptop and turned off the lamp. The room went dark except for the small light on the nightstand, steady and patient, like a lighthouse trying not to get involved. I lay awake, counting the seconds between my breaths. Somewhere in town, Lena was probably pacing, convinced she still had control. Maybe she did, emotionally if not legally. But I had something she didn't, clarity. The kind that burns slowly like a fuse made of calm. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'd start gathering the rest, bank records, mail, fragments of what used to be mine. Tomorrow, I'd stop reacting and start building. And if she came for me again, she'd find out how quiet resistance can roar. The morning arrived too bright for how little I'd slept. Sunlight carved narrow blades across the carpet, and the radiator hissed like an impatient witness. I lay still, waiting for my thoughts to settle, but they moved like restless birds in a cage. I'd always believed betrayal came loud. Slamming doors, shouted words, scenes you could point to later. But Lena's betrayal had been a whisper, a pen stroke, a click of a mouse. There was something almost elegant about its cruelty. At the diner across from the inn, the waitress recognized me from yesterday. "You're back," she said with a gentle curiosity. I nodded and ordered oatmeal I did want. The normalcy of it helped. It gave my hand something to do, while my brain built new scaffolding around the broken parts. By the time I reached Ruth's house, she was already outside, trimming the hedge with measured precision. "You got the confirmation, I assume," she said. "I did." "Good. That's the first layer. Now we build the second." Inside, her table was buried in printouts and notes. She'd turned my situation into an operation, columns, dates, initials. At the top of one sheet, I saw Lena's name. It looked foreign there, like graffiti on a monument. Ruth gestured for me to sit. "Your daughter's actions, these changes, require more than carelessness. Someone guided her. This Madison, you said she's in finance." "Yes, investment consulting. I think she started helping Lena with taxes after her divorce." Ruth made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a growl. Tax help often grows fangs. She might have convinced Lena that consolidating ownership would simplify things. People like that sell control as stability. I swallowed hard. Lena always said she wanted to make life easier for both of us. I thought she meant the garden, not the deed. Ruth looked at me over her glasses. "You can love someone and still need to defend yourself from them. Those two truths can coexist, even if they hurt." The printer in her office began humming. She disappeared for a moment, then returned with a stack of pages clipped neatly together. "This is your foundation," she said. "Bank statements, verification forms, tax IDs, all listing you as primary. We'll notarize duplicates. I still have a valid seal for certification, even if my public license expired. You'll need them if the matter escalates." I traced my finger over the embossed header on one of the documents. "Escalates," I repeated. "That's such a polite word for disaster." Ruth smiled faintly. "Paper doesn't panic. That's its strength. You can learn from that." By early afternoon, the town's rhythm shifted from quiet to restless. The streets filled with weekend visitors, couples with cameras, teenagers licking salt from paper fries, the whole town pretending permanence. I envied them. I stopped by the post office to rent a small mailbox, something with my name on it, tangible proof I still occupied a corner of this world. The clerk slid me a form without looking up. 3 months or 6? 6, I said, my voice steady, and renew automatically. The key they gave me was light, but it felt heavy in my palm. It was absurd, but in that moment, I believed the tiny metal could hold me together. That evening, as the tide rolled in, I sat by the window at the inn and started a list in my notebook, things that were still mine. My name, my story, the truth. I stopped at 3. I didn't want to jinx it. The phone buzzed again. "Lena." The message this time was longer. Mom, please talk to me. Madison says you filed something that could hurt all of us. You're overreacting. We just wanted to reorganize the assets. It's still your home. You're making it worse. Please. The words blurred together. Reorganize the assets. That was the language of spreadsheets, not families. I could almost hear Madison dictating it over her shoulder while sipping her perfect, indifferent coffee. I typed a reply, then erased it. Anything I said now would feed a fire I wasn't ready to extinguish. I turned the phone face down. Silence could be armor if you wore it right. Later that night, a knock came at my door. 3 sharp raps, too deliberate to be random. My pulse stumbled. I stood listening. Mom. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, but the edge in it was new. I opened the door halfway. Lena stood there, rain in her hair, eyes bright with exhaustion and something close to fear. She wasn't holding an umbrella, which meant she hadn't planned to wait long for permission. Can we talk? She asked. I didn't move. You've already said a lot without words. She looked past me into the room. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Madison said it was just paperwork, temporary. You were supposed to rest, not worry about bills. She said the transfer was easier if it came from me first. Stop, I said quietly. You forged my name. Her eyes flinched, the way people do when a truth hits like glass breaking. I didn't forge it, she said quickly. She filled it in. It was just a formality. I didn't even see all the documents. I exhaled slowly. And you didn't ask. The silence between us filled the hallway. I could hear the faint buzz of the inn's vending machine somewhere down the corridor. Mom, I thought you'd be grateful, she said finally. You hate dealing with paperwork. I just wanted to make things smoother. For who? She blinked, and for a second, the child I raised flickered through, the one who once apologized to a fern for forgetting to water it. I don't know, she whispered. Yes, you do. Tears gathered, but didn't fall. Madison said it would make the sale easier later. She said we could. Sell my house. It's our house. No, Lena, it isn't. The air turned solid. She stepped back, shaking her head, as if denial could rewind the world. I didn't want this to be a fight, she said. Then you shouldn't have started one. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked down the hall, her shoes leaving faint prints of rain. I watched until the door closed behind her, the echo small but complete. When I sat down again, the room felt larger. Not emptier, just quieter, the kind of quiet that follows a verdict. I picked up the notebook and wrote one more line under my list. For my resolve. Outside, the wind shifted toward the sea. Somewhere beyond the harbor, a light turned on in the fog. I thought of Ruth's words. The house remembers who watered the azaleas. Maybe memory was my strongest defense after all. Tomorrow I'd meet Ruth again. But tonight I let myself grieve, not for what I'd lost, but for what my daughter had become to find it. The morning after Lena's visit, the town felt different. Quieter but not kind. Even the gulls seemed to scream at a lower pitch. I left the inn early, walking toward Ruth's house with my collar turned up against the wind. The streets glistened with last night's rain, and every window reflected pieces of sky that looked nothing like peace. Ruth was already waiting at her table, papers spread out like a battle map. She glanced up, studying my face the way a doctor checks for fever. She came, Ruth said. I nodded, and I told her the truth. Ruth didn't ask for the details. Maybe she knew there are kinds of conversations that can't survive retelling. She poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and slid one across the table. Good. Now we move to protection. She handed me a new folder, heavier than the last. I filed a preemptive fraud notice this morning. If anyone tries to reopen or sell the property, the system will stop it automatically. They'll have to face the wall we built. I looked down at the folder. A wall of paper. Paper remembers, she said. It's more reliable than people. We spent the next hour making calls. The county office, the registrar, the utilities. Each conversation began the same way. My name, my address, my proof that I hadn't vanished. Each clerk spoke in calm monotone sentences, and yet with every form confirmed, I felt something inside me unclench, thread by thread. When we finished, Ruth sat back and lit a single candle that flickered near the stack of papers. "You've done enough for one day," she said. "Now we wait. Let them make the next move." But waiting is its own form of torture. That evening, I walked down Alder Street for the first time since I'd left. The air carried the smell of wet cedar and gasoline, and my heart stuttered at the sight of the house. The porch light was off again, just like the day it all started. I stood across the street, half hidden behind the hydrangea bush that used to bloom so fiercely every spring. The windows glowed faintly from inside, silhouettes moving behind thin curtains. I could make out two figures at the dining table, Lena and Madison. My daughter's posture was tight, her shoulders drawn in like she was bracing against something. Madison leaned forward, calm, efficient, tapping on a tablet. Even from this distance, I could tell she was explaining, justifying, persuading. She gestured toward a pile of folders on the table, probably the same ones Ruth and I had already rendered useless. Lena's hands moved to her face. She stayed that way for a long moment, then pushed the folders aside. Madison reached for her hand. Lena didn't take it. I turned away before they could look up. The sight didn't hurt the way I'd expected. It only confirmed what I already knew. They weren't villains, not in their own minds. They were just small people who'd mistaken love for ownership. When I returned to the inn, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address, just my name in hurried handwriting. Inside was a single sheet, an official request from a real estate firm, carbon copied to Lena and Madison. Pre-sale evaluation inquiry, it said. They were testing the wall. I called Ruth immediately. "They're still trying," I told her. She didn't sound surprised. "Of course they are. Desperation doesn't stop at the first obstacle. It just gets creative. Forward the document to me. I'll file a secondary lock, this time with a fraud investigators alert. If they try again, it'll trigger an audit." I sent the photo while we spoke. "They won't stop until I'm gone." "No," she said softly, "but they don't know yet that you've learned how to stay." When I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the envelope. The hotel's air conditioner hummed low, a sound like distant surf. For the first time, I felt something close to calm. Not relief, exactly, but clarity. They wanted me erased, replaced, silenced. Instead, I was becoming visible. That night, I dreamed of the house, not as a fortress, but as something alive, breathing in its beams and windows. I saw my hands touching its walls, leaving faint prints like smoke. When I woke, the dream stayed with me. Maybe the house had never belonged to anyone completely. Maybe it was just a keeper of stories, choosing which ones to remember. By noon, Ruth called again. "It's done. The fraud flag is active. You're untouchable now." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. So that's it. For now. A pause. "Evelyn, I need to tell you something. You have leverage. Not just protection, proof. If you want to take legal action, you can." "I don't want revenge," I said. "I just want peace." Ruth smiled faintly. "Peace is what people promise after they win. You're not there yet, but you're closer." Later that day, I walked down to the pier, the wind biting but clean. Fishermen were mending nets, children chasing gulls, life moving on without apology. I stood by the railing, watching the waves break against the rocks. The sea has no patience for human dramas. It just erases and rebuilds. Maybe that was the lesson I needed to learn. When I returned to the inn that night, I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. I already knew Lena would call, that Madison would send some carefully worded email dressed in civility. I was done replying to ghosts. Instead, I took out my notebook and drew a line under my list. Then, in slow, steady handwriting, I added one more word. Freedom. It wasn't a declaration. It was a direction. Tomorrow, I told myself I would start looking for a new home. Not to replace what I'd lost, but to build something untouched by betrayal. A place that remembered me because I built it from the ground up. The day I chose to let the house go, the sky took on the color of brushed steel. Decisive, unsentimental. Ruth and I sat across from each other at her kitchen table with the deed, the security hold, and the closing instructions arranged like instruments before surgery. She didn't push. She simply waited for my pen to decide. I'm not abandoning it, I said, more to the papers than to her. I'm releasing it. Ruth nodded once. Releasing can be an act of ownership. I signed. The ink settled without a tremor. Outside, the air tasted faintly of salt and cold light. On my way past the park near Alder Street, I paused at the empty beds and the iron rack of tools. I used to bring Lena there, counting seedlings as if they were small promises. The memory didn't split me open anymore. It just stood upright and breathed. By late afternoon, I walked the block of Alder for what I knew would be the last time as its keeper. No sign yet, but the house had already changed temperature. Rooms cooling with the awareness of departure. Through the kitchen window, I saw motion. Lena rinsing plates with the focus of someone scrubbing a guilt that won't dissolve. Madison sat at the table, attention pinned to her phone, calculations flickering behind her eyes. I crossed the street, climbed the steps, and unlocked the door. The mechanism yielded a final courtesy. Lena spun. You can't just come in. I still can, I said quietly. It remains mine until I say otherwise. Madison straightened. If this is about the registrar's notice, there's a misunderstanding. There isn't, I replied. The record is secured. Any attempt to move the title without me dies on contact. I set an envelope on the table. I've made a decision. I'm selling. Not to you. Not to anyone you suggest. And the proceeds won't land in your accounts. Madison's composure thinned. You're overreacting. I'm correcting, I said. Lena's face crumpled. Not into tears, but into confusion. Why? This was supposed to be our home. Home doesn't survive by erasing its maker, I answered. You made a choice. I'm making mine. Madison leaned forward, voice smooth as lacquer. This is punitive. This is freedom. I lifted my coat. The money goes to the Harbor House Foundation, I said at the doorway. A place for women in their later years who've been edged out of the lives they built. Legal help. A room with a lock that answers only to them. Lena's voice thinned. You'll give it all away? Not all, I said. Just what was compromised. I stepped outside and kept walking without turning around. Some thresholds you cross once. Noise only follows if you invite it. Ruth met me at the pier with 2 steaming cups and a look that held both pride and caution. You drew a clean line, she said. I drew the only line left. Then keep walking it. We watched the water stitch light into itself. For the first time in months, my sense of time wasn't measured by loss but by distance. How far I'd traveled away from the version of myself who waited on porches, expecting mercy. Back at the inn, I opened my notebook and wrote, Freedom is a key that turns from the inside. Then I slept like a house after a storm, shaken intact. Morning carried me to the ferry. No dramatics. I handed the room key back, stood on deck as the town softened into watercolor, and let the wind take what it wanted. Ahead waited a small craftsman near a city park, a building already leased, the first heartbeat of Harbor House. Not a shrine to what was taken, a beginning for what's about to live. The city I moved to had no tide to mark the hours, only buses and wind. My first morning there, I stood in the doorway of a modest craftsman. 2 rooms, a stubborn window, floors that needed listening. It wasn't lovely yet, but it answered to me. I started with what anchors a day, kettle, lamp, a narrow bed. Each object had a history I could name. Nothing here was borrowed in my name or signed by someone else's hand. I painted the walls the color of warm sand, scrubbed the wood until it remembered warmth, hung thin curtains that let morning spill in like quiet courage. The neighborhood introduced itself in ordinary sounds. Chain on a bicycle, a child's shout, a distant train that made the night feel roomy. Ruth called often. Sometimes we spoke of nothing. Sometimes she read small notes from donors who'd found her mission in a line of local news and decided to believe in it. Harbor House began to breathe. Our first resident arrived before the trees leafed out. Connie, retired nurse, steady hands, eyes that understood endurance, came with a single suitcase and a folded photograph of a garden she'd tended for decades. I was eased out, she said simply, by my daughter and her partner. The sentence was practiced, but pain still caught on its edges. I led her to the quiet room that faced the courtyard. She paused at the doorway. You kept the sage, she whispered. I planted it my first week, I said. Something that grows on purpose. By early spring, 3 doors held sleeping women whose names I knew and whose stories I didn't need to repeat to believe. I walked the hall each night, listening to the proof that safety makes a sound, breathing, the soft click of a lamp going dark, the hush of water in the pipes. Not sadness. Structure. Sometimes I thought about Lena. I didn't check real estate listings or social feeds. The anger, once bright as a flare, had cooled into an understanding I could hold without shaking. Control is a mask fear wears when it can't admit its name. I had worn that mask once, too. One afternoon, while sorting envelopes at the front desk, I found a smaller one with no return address. Inside lay a photograph of the Alder Street house. Windows bright, hydrangeas exploding like summer fireworks. On the back, in handwriting I'd recognize in a storm, was a single line. The house remembers you. I hope someday I can too. I didn't frame it. I didn't hide it. I slipped it into a drawer where tender things wait until they can be carried without tearing. Season turned with soft shoulders. The sage in the courtyard grew unevenly but insisted on being green. Laughter began to live in the kitchen in the early evenings. Mugs met saucers. A record player found the groove on a second try. Harbor House felt less like an address and more like a verb. Ruth visited at dusk one night. We stood by the window while the last light lifted off the leaves. You built something that can't be signed out from under you, she said. It isn't only mine anymore, I said. That's its strength, she answered. After she left, I stayed at the window a little longer. Fireflies stitched the garden with commas of light. I watered the sage, its scent rising, clear, resilient, honest. For years, I believed home was a deed and a lock. Now I understood. Home is the version of yourself that survives the inventory. I looked at my hands, steady, useful, and told the quiet, I'm not erased. I'm rewritten. A radio in the next room. Found a jazz station and let a trumpet loose in the air. Outside, the city moved, indifferent, forgiving. I didn't feel replaced. I felt rooted, not to a structure, to myself.